Welcome to the Philly Prime Podcast. I'm Dave Schratweiser. Busy weekend all across our region in the Philadelphia region. Incidents involving teens and juveniles from Ocean City to Chester on a SEPTA bus recently came out about an incident there. Langhorne, Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia as well, up and down the Jersey Shore. Most of these incidents involving juveniles or teenagers. It's a big issue being looked at by police chiefs and city administrators all across our region. And joining us today is former Philadelphia Police Deputy Commissioner and current school safety chief, Kevin Bethel. Welcome back to the show, Kev. Appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you for having me, Dave.
Well, Kev, you deal with school-age kids all the time in Philadelphia, in the school system and things like that. That's why we wanted to have you on, and we've spoken to you about this issue before. Just your thoughts on these incidents that occurred, literally, I think 5 or 6 of them across the region over the weekend. I'll recount some of them while we go through.
Yeah, I think David, it's indicative of what we see, even in my time in the police department dealing with the juvenile activity. When I see the level of violence, when we talk about specifically around the violence, I talk about the crowds. I'll park that for a minute and I talk about the kids in their groups. But some of the other activity where, are individuals going on buses and discharging weapons or in incidences where, we're just seeing that level. This is the downstream impact. And we've had this conversation around when you don't have a very strong gun policy. Because what these young people start to see is that, when there is no consequences and certainty. I'll start with the issue of certainty.
Yeah.
The consequences, I've always said there's room for, expanding, contracting, all that. But when you don't have a level of certainty, and then when you have the level of guns that have flooded into our communities, particularly during the COVID, when there was a lot of guns being bought and sold in the communities, now we're giving guns into the hands of young people more and more, and then we expect an undeveloped brain to do the right thing with the gun.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't. So some of these things shouldn't be surprising to us. Considering the level of guns in our community. And the fact that many of these young people today feel like there is no consequences or even certainty of what's going to happen with them, and so there's a gap right now.
Yeah, let's talk about that level of concern with this incident in Langhorne. As a matter of fact, I think it was a group of 5 altogether. Teens broke into a gun shop up there, stole more than 21 weapons, including some high-powered assault rifles, handguns, things like that. Made their escape. 3 different police departments gave chase. There's some video of them up on the roof inside the gun shop, smashing showcases there and taking guns, loaded them out into a car and took off. They even put down stop strips by the bridge heading into Trenton from Langhorne, trying to stop the car, and they ran right through that and ended up crashing in Trenton, where 3 teens were arrested. 2 of them were 16, 1 was 15, and 2 got away. These are not just teens involved with guns, but these are now teens stealing guns. There's been a rash of gun store break-ins of late that I know ATF and FBI and a few other groups are looking into. But now we have young kids like this, 16 and 15, breaking into gun shops, Kev, stealing guns. That's an even higher level of concern, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. And it's ironic, Dave, there was a time, you would not even think about going out into a county where where they do have very strong prosecution and very strong on a whole myriad of offenses that young people would feel they can are brazen enough now to go into those areas, believing that, guess what, part of it is because they may not be overly protected as our gun stores here in the city are, recognizing that that they could be a potential target. Many of them are fortified to a high level, and so they go out to a more softer target area where these type of activity doesn't normally occur, and so they're chasing the weak spaces. But it also shows you you watch these young people here. This is adult stuff, right? This is strategic, right? They know exactly where they're going. They know how they're going to get in. They're bringing equipment to be able to facilitate that, and so I wouldn't be surprised that there's a mastermind behind that, an adult or someone who's walked them through, how to do a heist like this, and they may be potentially doing other stuff. We're focusing on the guns, but in individuals working in a mechanized operation like they are, is something that they practice, something that they probably have mapped out.
Clearly, yeah.
They probably got guidance from someone. I wouldn't be surprised that there's some adult behind the scenes who also show them, how to go, where to go, when to go, what gun to get. So it's not like they're in there looking for any gun. They're in there looking for specific weapons, and they're looking for those more high profile, high velocity weapons.
Yeah.
And so, it creates a large concern for anyone.
Good news here. 3 different police departments got involved, apprehended the guys, and retrieved all of the guns, so they never made it to the street. But those kind of weapons on the street, already in a kind of juiced up situation where violence on the street and guns are already rampant, the last thing you want to do is add guns like that to the scenario, to the equation, to the recipe here.
There's no question about that, Dave. I mean, we're dealing with a crisis with when we talk about shooting violence and homicides, as we talked about previously on your show, that the gun is starts that process, and if so it creates a significant challenge for law enforcement and others to address.
There's some video also that came out this week, released yesterday and again today, on a SEPTA bus from May 17th. It has 5 teens on the street, then boarding the bus and attacking passengers like immediately. And during the fracas on the bus, a gun goes off from one of the teens who was on the bus and strikes 2 passengers on the bus. But this looked like also kind of well planned out. They kind of moved down the block. They're all dressed in black hoodies with masks, kind of make their way down the street, past pedestrians, get to the bus, and right on the bus, I wouldn't give them compliments like saying in a SWAT type style, but in line, in formation, going kind of in the bus and then immediately attacking people. And inside a SEPTA bus, you are confined in a situation like that, and there's not much you can do. You don't have a lot of room to defend yourself. And a few people got assaulted, a couple people got shot. But again, according to the police, these are juveniles or teens involved, doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, I'm not surprised. I mean, I think the last time we were on your show, we were talking about the shootings outside of a school, right? And the number of homicides and shootings I've had where my students have been killed almost at the doorstep of the school.
Yeah.
And so I think, I often tell people, the SEPTA is just an extension of the community. I mean, we've seen enough shootings across the city now that, there's no border, there's no more. There used to be, some level of respect in the street, even during some of some of the most difficult times. And I'm not going to say as a kid coming up in West Philadelphia, it was perfect, but there was rules of engagement, in the community, during those times as well. A large group of gangs were very prominent, and gang wars would pop out on the block. But there was this understanding. But these young people today have no borders. I mean, they do not care where they are. I mean, Dave, I'll give you a good example. Saturday night, I was out at an event in 60th and Pine in West Philadelphia with my friends who have grown up in the neighborhood. I grew up out there. Yeah, we're all celebrating turning 60, and I'm sitting in. And there's my buddy owns a place there. He's got a small little community group area where inside a band is playing. Next thing I know, the door opens up, and here come my friends flying in. And there's a shooting outside. I watch as a young lady's, laying on the highway, and my buddy attends to them, and I ultimately wound up walking over and helping the cop pull the girl into the car. But when you look at the video, I mean, there was something going on, a scrum going on inside the Asian food store across the street, and then all you see is a guy lean out the door and just start firing rounds up the street with no concern whatsoever who's going to get hit. And so I think this kind of continual random violence is what you see and across the city, and it's really unfortunate. It was a difficult night for me because it just was kind of,
I'm sure,
like born and raised, and now some of our neighborhoods have turned into battlefields.
Interesting. Same kind of thing at Penn's Landing over the weekend. There was some shots fired down there. There was a large group of juveniles and teens that gathered there, according to police. Same thing in Chester, outside the Union Stadium. Several hundred teens gathered in the parking lot, apparently, and a gun was pulled out, a gun or two, and 8 people were wounded up there. So it's not just going on in Philadelphia in the city. It's all kind of spreading out, as you said. It doesn't really know any borders. And in the past, people would be afraid to go out to the counties and cause havoc like this because the district attorneys in those counties they walk with a big, rule of book of rules there, and you could get some serious time in the counties when you're doing things like that. Bucks County, Montgomery County, now we're out in Chester County, that kind of thing. It just seems like, as you said, they're going to travel where they want to travel here.
Yeah, but but when we're talking about juveniles, right? So it's not hard for it to get if the right adults, the right influencers are available, because most young people don't understand the consequences. Their brains are not fully developed to understand the consequences of their actions, right? That's why they'll put their hand on the fire and see if it gets burned before they will know that don't put your hands on the fire, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what has evolved, and there was a time, and I think I started to share with you before, where we had the wolf packs. When I came into the police department in the early '80s, we were dealing with bands of young people, but they were wolf packs, as at the time they call them. They would gather and go after and attack individuals. At the time when I was working as a cop down Center City.
Right.
But it wasn't gunplay. There was, we went through the process of wilding, where the kids had moved to start, attacking young ladies and taking their clothes and stripping their clothes. We dealt with some of that out in the plateau when we're dealing with some of the festivities out there.
Yeah.
But again, and then even when I was on the department, not so long before I left, we're dealing with the flash mobs, right? Where where the kids were grabbing and the knockout. Not too long ago, I think we were had its ebbs and flows where kids were walking around playing the knockout game. Yeah. But the change now, though, is when those groups, you can break them into. I used to break them into two categories. It was that convergent group. That convergent group was a group of kids that are coming. They're purposeful, right? Wolfpack, kids they're coming with a sheer purpose. Mm-hmm. I'm coming because I want to do negative stuff, and I hook up with you, Dave, and then we hook up with 20 other people, and when we get together, we all know what we're doing. Yeah, it is all about what can we do, where can we wreck, and but then you also had what I found sometimes with our flash mobs when we were dealing with that. It was just a contagious activity, right? 50 kids get swarmed to a location, oftentimes driven by social media, get into a space, and then guess what? All you need is a few triggers, a few people in there who start something, and then the group just seems to go with it. Yeah, it's not as as confined and as strategic maybe as a convergent group, because they already know what their purpose is. Yeah, but it's easy for that behavior, and we would see that oftentimes when we had our incidents downtown with our flash mobs, and kids would show up. No one knows who called us, but now we're here. We're going to walk together. We would chase them, and then they would run all over the place. We learned to stop chasing them because we were creating that. But I think that in all of this, the introduction now is that you're more inclined now to have some young people with guns. And so when you saw some of the earlier stuff on Market Street earlier this year, where the guy had a gun, that's a different dynamic. Like, I never really went into those situations working, when we had our large flash mobs, even when we had the biggest of the big ones one day, when we had South Street was taken over and we were dealing with a lot, never really was worried about the young people had guns. It was really just a hand-to-hand combat, and you're trying to control that. But now there's this introduction. So even when I looked at the video for down, and I'm looking, the cops are on the other side, and then obviously, I guess the guns goes off. I can see the kids start to spread. Right. And so it's even become normal for them. As you see this activity unfold. So it really is scary. And I don't think people, and I've said this before, understanding that, if we don't address the gun, if we don't really make that like the holy grail of where we start and end, and we continue to ignore, the stuff, like I said, the stuff I see here today is stuff that's downstream. We have, and we got to go upstream and start to really have some really proactive activity in that space to get kids and others to settle down. Yeah. When
you approach groups like this, Kevin, what's the tactic that you want to use in a situation like that? Now, some of this, and I'll talk about the stuff in Jersey that happened over the weekend, is the police are severely hamstrung here by a new state law that I'll get into in a minute. That happened in Ocean City and Wildwood and Seattle, where they're dealing with teens on the boardwalk or on the beach, large numbers of them at a time with backpacks. Some of them are drinking, things like that. They are limited now. But I want to talk about, as a police officer for more than 30 years involved in law enforcement, what's your thought on how do you approach a group like that or maybe even how do you stop it? I know social media, you and I talked about this a lot the last time. I mean, that's what spreads it like wildfire.
Yeah. The influence of social media is substantial. But I mean, one of the things we learned when I was under Commissioner Ramsey and Commissioner Ross, and we were dealing with the flash mobs. I mean, the first thing was enforcement, right? And we were spending millions of dollars and hundreds of police officers on South Street and the like, trying to combat these groups from surging. And man, it was still, even with all that, I mean, at some point we had Center City just kind of cordoned off, and
right.
But one of the things I learned through that process is that you really have to have a kind of a three-pronged approach, because enforcement in and of itself is not going to stop. But clearly, when they're engaging in criminal and action, yeah, you're going to have your rapid response and you're going to have your resources available. And I think the police department was able to do that over the weekend. But from a more strategic space, this is not an issue that the police department can resolve in and of themselves, right? And because as I share with you, when I go back and I talk about Wolfpack Save, I'm talking about 30 years ago.
Right.
When you look across the nation, these things have been going on with our young people for a long time. So no one can sit there and pump their chest and say, hey, guess what? I've had this magic bullet to resolve all of this. Where the real hard work comes in, you have to have a three-pronged approach: prevention, intervention, and enforcement. And you really have to, and you have to have good intelligence. I mean, part of the work we would do is really focusing on the intelligence part and the social media part. And it can't just be about social media. It's talking to parents, it's talking to adults, it's talking to others to get feedback to say, hey, guess what? I hear there's going to be something happening here.
Right.
Or and so you can get ahead of it. I know the police department was able to do that effectively a couple of weekends ago when they got word that they were going to form up at a particular rec center. That kind of early intelligence gets to, because what you're trying to do is not let them get to that place where they can converge or they can become contagious, right? You're trying to stop it before that activity happens.
Right.
And it can be an effective strategy. But at the same token, we're still talking about, you see some of the kids running around. We're still looking at some kids like 9 years old, 10 years old running out there.
Yeah.
Right? And so you got to bring in that community aspect where you're really working with the community groups and your clergy and your social services and others. Because listen, at the end of the day, those people who are sitting on the sidelines saying, police department, we don't want you to do this. Right. And don't do this to these children. And you need to find other things for these children to do. Well, guess what? You need to step up to the plate and provide those things, because the police department doesn't have a treasure trove of programming that they could say on a Friday night, I got a place for kids to go to hang out and party, all night long till 12 o'clock. And then there's this conversation around parenting, right? And but at the same token, we can't make these assumptions that parents know, right? And so my mom worked. My mother was a single parent. When my mom went to work, Kevin Bethel knew he's supposed to be home, but she didn't know where I was all the time. And so part of that is bringing in parents, and and they become part of the consequences too, right? If your son is out there, vandalizing and causing disruption and engaging in behavior, there has to be a conversation with, if it's not a parent or whoever that adult is in that child's life. And so I think that three-pronged approach ultimately won't stop it, but it can have some significant impacts. And then at the intel piece too, you're really looking for who are those people. So some of this stuff may be really planned. One of the things we found from the flash mob activity was there was planning, but it wasn't about violence. It was about dancing at the time.
Yes.
Dance parties. Right? If you remember, Dave, you
covered it.
Right. And it wasn't until we after spending a whole bunch of money, listening to a talk show one day, a radio show, and realized Dollar Boys and Team Nike and what the heck are they talking about? Yeah. It wasn't until we brought those folks into the group that we realized what it was. And then we would sit down with those leaders of those groups and find out there was a couple of those groups who were doing that convergent type of behavior, who were looking to be violent. And that's when we really started to be very strategic and going after those individuals. Yeah. And that ultimately helped to settle it down. I mean, we went so far as that when they were having events, we would put officers at their events to minimize the surging into that place. But our kids are going to constantly, particularly in the city of Philadelphia, going to be looking for places to go. Yeah. It ain't about just because there's not enough rec centers. They're looking for the South Street. They don't feel like South Street's their hot spot anymore, right? No. I mean, with all the issues they have on South with the enforcement on the South Street.
Yeah, now it's down to Spruce Street or Penn's Landing.
So now they go to Dilworth Plaza the other day, right? They they're not going into the fashion district anymore because they have a new policy.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have these groups of young people. No, I think in some cases, no matter what you do, as much as hard as you work, are going to get on social media, say, "Hey,
Yeah.
Dave, meet me down on Penn's Landing." Okay,
Yeah.
and next you know, you got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 kids
Yeah.
because they're just pulling more down, and then you get that contagious behavior, and then subset to that, you get that heavy,
Yeah.
group that wants to do some ill will.
Yeah, the flip side of that is on Instagram, No Gun Zone, which is always airs a whole bunch of videos
Mm-hmm.
and stuff from the community, things like that. They pop up usually on the weekends, 3 or 4 times a week, a picture of a big, large crew of people hanging out on the street, and the wording comes up: "Parents, it's 8 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? If
Right.
you don't, why don't you check on them and see where they are?" Is it that simple? I mean, or would that help? Maybe emphasizing that, maybe instead of just asking somebody going out the door where they're going, maybe check up on them in the middle of in the middle of the evening kind of thing, and see if you can maybe say, "Hey, why are you going there?" Or, "I don't think it's a good idea to go there." Is that a piece of this, a
Yeah,
parental piece?
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it all starts at home, right? I mean,
Yep.
so there's absolutely no question that it starts at home, but we also have to give the right message to those homes as to what do we want them to do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, part of what we had done under, at the time under Mayor Nutter, and we were working, there was a lot of, we were doing a lot of press conferences, as you
Yeah.
remember, Dave. We were putting messaging, right? Because people are in today. I mean, how do you message that to the parent? You saw that. You just told me about a video that I'm not watching the 24-hour news cycle, right? Parents are
Yeah.
not watching that 24-hour news cycle. So what is, we have to take a hard look and say, how are we communicating to those parents? What is the message we're trying to tell them to do? I mean, what are we ultimately trying to do? And so they bear responsibility. So I'm not advocating that as a parent their responsibility, but I have 3 daughters, man. They walk out the door every day. What I mean? If they're out there doing something, I want somebody to tell me. But we also got to start naming this stuff as well, right? We got to start telling folks, what I mean, and what's going on. We need to, because sometimes, I mean, depends on what channel you turn on to.
Yeah.
Nothing happened over the weekend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then there's certain channels that are covering all of the activity. I mean, there was a small hit early, I think, that when I saw the kids down there, but
Yeah.
no one's doing it like a full throttle, like, hey, guess what?
Yeah.
We have a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, and we need everybody to have an all hands on deck. I mean, even when we were doing the flash mob, we had our clergy out with us, Dave. I know even during some of the South Street deployments, we had our clergy were out there to kind of help us bridge some of the activity. But I just think and it goes to these cycles particularly when we talk about these large groups of kids. I sometimes, Dave, it's hard to understand how do we went for no flash mobs for a long period of time, and then all of it. I think sometimes they look across the country and they see that in Chicago they had their swarming and the stuff they did there. I think they did some stuff in DC, and so they start seeing this activity. I don't know if that creates this kind of space.
Yeah.
I mean, and because I push back against. I know this argument. There's nothing for our children to do, and I hear that, but nothing to do is a long jump from nothing to do to going down there and brutalizing people or damaging and jumping on windshields.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know what that is, right? And we kind of know what it is, but we have to be, we can't also give these narratives to our young people, similar to what we're saying now. Hey, you carry a gun because you don't feel safe. That's what adults are telling young people today. That I understand why you're carrying a gun, because it's not safe on the streets. Well, there's enough studies that tell you that more guns on the street and the impact that has. So that's a totally flawed argument for adults telling children that it's okay. So we also can't be in this space too, saying, hey, guess what? I know you don't have anything to do, and this is why you're doing that. Well, wait a minute, time out. Kevin came from the same neighborhoods, tough background as well. That's not, I won't put that in that same category. And but you got to hit it from multiple places, which and really it's key to get the intelligence. It's like they're forming up pretty often now, so there's maybe somebody underneath who's instigating the because it's ironic that you always seem to have somebody being able to sit there and film the whole thing, right? And it's also amazing to me watch adults sitting there videotaping children, and they getting excited about watching that that unfold. So it's a challenge.
And I don't want to just pick on Philadelphia and the Philadelphia region. I live down at the shore, Ocean City. Over the weekend, they had large groups of kids gathering on the beach, on the boardwalk. A lot of drinking going on. There was some fights. Police reported that they responded to almost 1,000 incidents this past weekend. Not all on the boardwalk and on the beach, but all over town. Sea Isle has had a similar problem. Had to institute a curfew there and ban backpacks on the boardwalk and on the beach after a certain hour. Ocean City is now saying, in fact, the council is meeting today. The mayor has already announced on Tuesday that they're going to do that here. No backpacks on the beach after 8 o'clock or on the boardwalk. They're going to have a curfew. They're going to dial that back for teens as well. Wildwood has had this problem as well. So it is not just a situation affecting the cities where all these kids are getting together. And listen, nobody doesn't want kids to get together and enjoy themselves on the boardwalk. You want to go walk up and down the boardwalk, grab something to eat, chat with your friends, hang out. That's okay. But when it spills onto the beach, hundreds of kids on the beaches and the boardwalks, and now they're drinking on top of it. And a lot of times these young people don't know how to handle alcohol like that. Then it starts to get a little bit of crazy. They had some fighting, things like that going on. Wildwood, like I said, is cracking down. Sea Isle is cracking down, and now Ocean City is. Kev, so this is not just a city environment situation. These kids want to get together, and they're getting together all over the place.
Well, listen, there's no question about that, and I don't, and I appreciate you calling that out. I know we're having a conversation specific stuff to Philadelphia, but
right.
Hey, listen, even after the Phillies game, or even after your NBA championships and your college championships, I mean, or your spring breaks, right? We see enough of the activity across the nation, across all races and economic stratus of individuals. And it just reinforces the concept that, when you bring large groups of individuals together, it's so hard to control. Right. And so part of that process too, though, has to be, you're going to have to get down in the weeds and figure out what is going on. I mean, though they may not like it, and though we may not often like it, there is come a time where we do have to sit down with those young people and ask them why.
Yeah.
What are you trying to do? As I shared with you during our issues addressing the flash mob, I mean, it was when we sat down and we started to talk to those kids, and when I remember Supreme Court Kevin Doherty, I mean, we got those, we brought him into his space at one point and kind of challenging them like where. And so it is going to take these organizations. I mean, whether it be in particularly with the activity that may be going on in Jersey.
Yeah.
Like what is the goal? Like what are they trying to do? You'd be surprised sometimes, Dave, that sitting down with them, you may see them as this adversary and there's something that you just want to evaporate. But sometimes they will sit down and say, hey, guess what? Well, you might want to talk to this group.
Yeah.
Because within that big group, you may have these more individuals who are looking to do more harm and do some more things that are outside the norm. Yeah. And they will point you to them, or they may say, hey, guess what? How about if you give us this section over here?
Yeah.
And we'll police it, and we'll make sure we keep it right, and we'll make sure. I think the struggle you have is if the legislation of it, becomes a challenge, right? We saw that when we were instituting, the curfew. I mean, we could only hold that for so long, Dave. I mean, and it was very costly to do that. And many of your particularly your police departments in the areas that you outlined are not large police departments, right? No. They're very small. These are bedroom communities, right? when it's not summer, right? And so it's a challenge for them overall. And so, unfortunately, you look to the legislation, but you got 1,000 kids and you say no drinking, they look at you like, my group is bigger than your group.
Precisely.
And they also know what the outcome is going to be. Okay, well, you're going to give me a ticket for drinking on there. Okay, so I'm willing to take that. And we also learned enough from our juveniles that because you got hit, pinch, Dave, doesn't mean that you just got caught.
Yeah.
I didn't get caught. You didn't catch me. And so they're okay. They're okay with losing a couple of their flock.
Yeah.
As long as they can continue to surge and have a good time. And the more they look at us like parents, the more we say they can't. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Then the more they're often inclined to say, well, I'm gonna show you can't stop me.
Yeah.
And so it is requires, like I said, a lot of effort in managing an individual's expectation that is very difficult for a
Yeah.
police department to
Yeah.
to stop 1,000 people, or even juveniles, adults, as you've seen in the riots.
Mhm.
It's not like you got some magic bullet. I
Yeah.
mean, where some just, hey, stop, police, and they're going to stop, right? There
Yeah.
is this,
Yeah. Well,
right
further
now.
hamstring, and I mentioned at the top of the show, Ocean City Mayor Jay Gillian mentioned in his press release on Tuesday, after all these incidents over the weekend, that he believes the police are severely hamstrung down here by new legislation that was passed in Trenton and apparently approved by the governor, which limits police on searching a backpack belonging to a juvenile, even approaching a juvenile and questioning him at length without substantial reason for doing that. You just can't, because 25 kids are hanging around, you just can't wade into the crowd and start talking to kids about why they're there, what they're doing, that kind of thing. And he was very critical of that, saying, it stops the police department from doing things or any kind of proactive thing that might break up a crowd like that, or get a crowd like that to at least dissipate or go home. And I know he was concerned about that. And I guess that's why they went to the curfew measure and things like that, because if you can't stop them individually, you have to stop them as a group from even gathering there after a certain hour.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, I think we have to be. I often talk to my colleagues. I think we've allowed, I understand sometimes legislations, there's good intentions, and some of it is baked in law,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Terry versus Ohio and reasonable suspicion and stop and frisk. So those things have been on the books way before any legislation has come through, and whether that legislation just refined it and made it more succinct as to, hey, guess what, this is what you can't do.
Yeah.
But it's incumbent upon us as as law enforcement leaders to find other ways and other tools and to be able to still function effectively.
Yeah.
I mean, if that means that you have to go back to your legislators because, and guess what, they've added another layer on top of what the Supreme Court has said is already allowable, and now you're being handcuffed, and you have to make that case, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I get frustrated sometimes is when we point to they or them, or until we really, you have to really take a hard look within your codes, your city codes, your crimes codes, the Georgia crime code, to see
Yep.
what are we trying to accomplish here. Because I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the issues seem to be, I understand the backpack, they're going to have potentially their alcohol in it, but I guess once they take the alcohol, then that's still a prohibited act. So at that point, I'm assuming you still have, at that point, probable cause or reasonable suspicion, because you already set that as a law.
Yeah.
But can you even enforce that? I mean, and so it really comes down to, it's. I mean, I think I hear some people say, you go get them and all that. This is very, very difficult work. It is. You're talking about children, right? So it's you're talking about young people, and I'm not talking about the ones that are more, the violent stuff, but our kids are doing this convergent behavior and getting together.
Yeah.
You look into a crowd, and you got kids as young as 10, and so there is a different, you're not talking. I mean, you got to be very careful, right? You have to be very, very recognized, because oftentimes when you look in those crowds, you see your children, right? You're not, and so you have to. That's why I said you. And I think there's times where you also have to say, hey, you have to humble ourselves and recognize that we don't have all of the answers.
Yeah.
Yes, I work with young people at the school district, but there's people who are very seeped in this space, who understand the science, who understand, adolescent development, who understand or community groups and young people who work with these young people.
Right.
But sometimes their voice have a stronger impression on these kids. I remember during the flash mob, it was DJ Diamond Cuts. Was the DJ at the time, and I think she's still very active in that work. But I mean, she had a significant influence on those young people. And if I recall, she would start to say, "Hey guys, you got to settle down." Yeah. When she said it, she could make things happen, and she probably still has that influence today. Yeah. And so part of that is you also have to find those influencers within those groups who say, "Hey, guess what? Dave Shriver and Kevin Bethel could sit there with we can have 10 bars on our shoulders and bazookas strapped to our back." The kid looking at you like, "Hey, you ain't going to shoot that, and I ain't worried about you." But guess what? If Taylor Swift sat up there and said, "Hey, calm down," they would get down on their legs and knees and drop everything and say, "We'll never do it again."
Yeah.
You know, and so I think part of what you have to do is work to find those individuals who can
Yeah.
communicate with those young people
Yeah.
in a way that they understand, and that hey, guess what you're doing is not appropriate.
Yeah. And this is a real challenge for police officers' skill set. I mean, you not only have to have your policing, acumen really down, but you have to have patience. You got to take some abuse sometimes with language that is thrown at you, that kind of thing. And it's interesting to see how younger officers handle those situations and how more senior officers do. But as a police officer yourself back in the day, and what I saw on the street for almost 40 years in the Philadelphia area, is those kind of situations, it can be very challenging for a police officer to calmly, keep the situation under control. And as you said, you could have kids as young as 10 years old in that crowd, and you could have people in their mid 20s. It's a mix. So you have to kind of, divide it out or coordinate it out, kind of break it up a little bit so you understand how to deal with a crowd like that.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, Dave, you gotta put it on, because I mean, some of these kids will use languages that me and you would have never said to an adult. I mean, and many of them, especially when you have young people who obviously may be coming from broken homes, or in their family where
Yeah.
they have minimal respect for adults. So if you don't have respect for the parents in your homes,
Yeah.
there's no way you're going to step out the door and have respect for the officer standing in front of you, or in many cases, other adults.
Yeah.
And so, many of my kids, that's why I've always been so proud of my school safety officers, who don't have guns in the school, who don't have any of those offenses, but they've learned through training, to let those words fall off of you. I mean, I've been in plenty of protests where I've been called everything. I didn't know I had so many nephews when they calling me uncle, and calling me all kinds, talking about my mother, and just to try to trigger me. I would hope today that the officers who are well trained in their space understand not to fall for those traps, but just like anything, we're human.
Yeah.
But many of these kids will test you.
Yeah.
And I have to give, I mean, despite what people see, I mean, I have to give the Philadelphia Police Department a lot of credit. It is hard work. I mean, because sometimes people see, where you're not locking up all these kids, and they can oftentimes see that as a failure.
Yeah.
I said, but if we have 700 kids, yes, they may have broken a few windows, and those are the things that we kind of hit the cameras when the kid jumps over. But if they can successfully, dissolve that, mitigate that situation, get those 700 kids to leave the area.
Yeah.
They may have made a few arrests because, just like anything else, a few of the kids are not going to stand down. And there was no serious injuries. And, even though in this case, then sometimes we have to take that as a win.
Yeah.
Because they didn't cause that, right? The police department didn't cause those 700 people. Something else caused that.
Right.
But they were able to get in, mitigate the issue, get those kids, out of the area, disperse it. It doesn't look good, right? So, it doesn't look good on TV, right? You see it on TV. But at the same time, I mean, considering all the challenges the department is facing, and other departments as well across the nation, but in particular Philadelphia, and sometimes you have to say, look at the glass half full, and then at the same time, you're working to try to minimize or hopefully eliminate these activities. And that's where the kind of on the ground hard work involves. And that's where you really got to work in collaboration with others.
Okay. Let's finish this up, Kev, by talking about we now have a Democratic candidate and a Republican candidate for mayor. January, we're going to have a new mayor. In your opinion, former deputy commissioner in charge of school safety now, the new mayor has to hit the ground running on these issues. Am I right? Not just the gun violence, the shootings, the carjackings, things like that, but this is an issue now. But there needs to be a pretty good plan day one. A lot of them talked about in the primary, declaring a state of emergency on day one, that kind of thing. What's your kind of vision on what whoever the new mayor is, David O on the Republican side, Sherelle Parker on the Democratic side, both good candidates, former city council people, understand their way around the bases here, so to speak, in Philadelphia. How important is it to jump right on these issues right away when they come into office?
I mean, I think we have to manage those expectations as well, Dave. I mean, I think, yes, there's going to be a desire for anyone who's coming into that space on day one, but just like anything else, there's this transition that has to happen, right? I mean, the new leader, new mayor who comes in, is going to have to evaluate the playing field and exactly, what's going on internally.
Yeah.
Yeah, within, and then you have some significant decisions to make around, creating your team to make that happen. So I think we have to, I know there's a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
But it would be unfair to drop that on any new mayor. That that, hey, guess what, yes, I know, you understand it because you ran for the position, so you understand what's been going on. But I think it'd be unrealistic to think that day one. I mean, it's going to take time for whomever comes into the department. I mean, into the different departments. She'll make the decision around who her team will be. I think both of them have put forth their crime plans and what they expect to do. So obviously there will be a responsibility of those folks in leadership to execute that plan, but also, work with that leadership and provide their expertise on how that can be accomplished.
Yeah.
But I think it's, listen, obviously both, it's a great race, right? It was a lot of good energy, a lot of folks engaged in the process. So it'll be an interesting time to see, after all these years, man, of the transitions of mayors. I guess over my lifetime, I guess there's been quite a few, but I think, again, we just have to be careful, that we didn't get into this situation overnight. Right. And so we have to be careful not to expect a new leader to come in and just turn on the switch. Yes, the state of emergency, but you remember under Mayor Nutter, when Commissioner Ramsey was a state of emergency, but it took us 4 years, Dave, to finally get turned over and really get leaning forward to really get his plan and the activity in play. We were able to stabilize, so we didn't go, but it was a challenge, right? And so I think those same challenges exist today. It's a different type of environment than when I was there in before 2016, and so you're going to have to figure out how to operate in this space in a different way. We have a very progressive DA. And so what does that look like as you start to try to institute a different strategy, and so all of that's going to require a lot of skill, a lot of work, it's going to take a lot of work. But I think, I'm excited about change. I think change is always good, and new eyes, new vision, new places, new people, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Okay. Kevin, I appreciate you coming on the show. We always want to talk with you because you have your finger on the pulse with young people. Clearly, this past weekend, there was a lot of concern across the region about some of these incidents. And I always like to bring on people who kind of know exactly what the ball game is. And you clearly know that when it comes to the young people and the folks and dealing with the police departments and things like that. So thanks for coming on the show again. Greatly appreciate it. And the door is always open. You know that.
Thank you for having me, Dave. Always a pleasure to be on.
All right. Thanks again. I appreciate it. That's Philly Prime Podcast for this week. We'll talk to you again soon.